In 1994, the strangulation of two women within the space of just a few months shocked the small town of Grantham in Lincolnshire. The brutal murders left both the police and local community to wonder if a serial offender was operating in the area. Despite a number of promising leads during the course of both investigations, the murders remain unsolved, with opinions still divided as to whether or not they were committed by the same person. Welcome to the Crime Portal. These are the cases of Sharon Harper and Julie Pacey. Grantham is a market and industrial town located in Lincolnshire, England. It lies 23 miles south of Lincoln and 22 miles east of Nottingham and is situated on the banks of the River Witham. The town has a population of around 45,000 people and is famed as the birthplace of the first female UK Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. It is also the town in which Sir Isaac Newton was educated, having been born close by. Major crime in the town was, and still is, a fairly rare occurrence. However, in the year 1991, Grantham was thrust into the national media spotlight following the arrest and subsequent conviction of serial killer Beverly Allitt. Nicknamed the Angel of Death, Allitt was given 13 life sentences after being found guilty of 4 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, and 6 counts of GBH, crimes which were all committed against infants while Allitt was employed at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital as a state-enrolled nurse on the hospital's children's ward. Just a few years later, in 1994, the unassuming town was returning to a sense of normality, but that would all change as Grantham once again received national media attention following the violent strangulation of 2 innocent women. By the end of June 1994, Sharon Harper had been 21 for just a number of days. She lived at Grantham's Sycamore Court on the southwest side of town, and at the time was eagerly planning her wedding to fiancé Michael Duller, which was scheduled to take place the following year. The pair had been together 2 years and shared a 4-month-old daughter, Sarah. Sharon had been back at work for just under 2 months, returning to her part-time job as a barmaid at the Market Cross pub, which was located on Westgate in Grantham, 1.5 miles from Sycamore Court where Sharon lived. On Friday the 1st of July 1994, Sharon prepared herself for a shift behind the bar. As Michael was working nights as security guard out of town, baby Sarah was dropped off with Sharon's friend Emma between 6:30 and 7 p.m. After staying for just a few minutes, Sharon left and made her journey to work on foot. Sharon's shift is reported to have gone as normal, with nothing unusual happening at the pub. After closing time at around midnight, once the patrons had all left, the pub staff gathered around the bar for a drink. One by one, they filtered out, with Sharon being one of the last people to leave at around 10 or 15 minutes past midnight. Michael Duller had previously agreed to meet his bride-to-be at 8 a.m. as the two had planned to go shopping. Pulling his car into Sycamore Court, Michael noticed something he thought was odd. Despite it being summer and bright outside, the kitchen light appeared to be on. Michael felt this was strange, but didn't think too much of it and went on to enter the flat, calling out to Sharon, but was met with no response. Unable to find his fiancée or baby daughter in the flat, Michael swiftly made his way to the home of Sharon's friend Emma and was reunited with baby Sarah. After confirming with Emma that Sharon had not returned since leaving for her shift the previous evening, Michael alerted Lincolnshire police at around 10:30 a.m. Family, friends and colleagues were all contacted, but there was no sign of the missing 21-year-old for the duration of Saturday the 2nd of July. The worst fears of Sharon's loved ones became a reality on Sunday the 3rd of July when her lifeless body was tragically found at 3:45 p.m. by children playing in a car park on Grantham's Earlsfield Lane. The location of the discovery is less than half a mile from both Sharon's home and the pub at which she worked. She had been beaten, strangled to death and left partially clothed amongst shrubbery. Police were called to the scene and scoured the area for clues while they simultaneously began piecing together a timeline of Sharon's last known movements by taking statements from those close to her. They quickly established the last people to have seen the victim alive were her colleagues at the Market Cross pub. They would also come to learn that despite the location Sharon's body was found being on a viable route back to her home from the pub, this is not the way she would normally choose to go. Sharon was known to have walked past Earlsfield Lane and continued heading south down Harlaxton Road before turning right onto Trent Road in order to reach the estate on which she lived. None of the pub's other staff members could recall anything unusual about Sharon's last shift the previous Friday. Sharon was apparently in good spirits, as was usually the case according to those that knew her. She even made plans with a colleague to go out for drinks that weekend. police were unable to find anything about Sharon's life that would suggest she was in any immediate danger. She was a well-liked, popular member of the community, a loving mother in a happy relationship, and had no criminal ties or known enemies. News of the horrific crime spread quickly across the small town, which resulted in a number of calls from the public to Lincolnshire police. Two specific sightings were of particular interest to investigators, as they both described seeing Sharon arguing with the same man shortly after she left work in the early hours of Saturday, the 2nd of July. Both of the callers, identified as males, refused to give their names to police and were never traced. The first individual shared his account during two separate phone calls made to police on Monday the 4th of July. He claimed not only to have seen Sharon, but actually spoken to her at around 12:30 AM outside the Archways petrol station, located roughly a quarter of a mile from the Market Cross pub on Sharon's route home. The anonymous witness claimed to have been driving down Harlaxton Road and noticed Sharon arguing with a man described as being in his mid-30s with long hair. This concerned the driver so much that he stopped his vehicle and opened the window to ask Sharon, quote, "Are you alright?" To which Sharon hastily replied, "Yeah, I'm fine," causing the driver to continue on his way. While the second caller also refused to give his name to police, he did reveal something about his identity by claiming to be a taxi driver. The time of this sighting is said to have been between 12:40 and 12:45 AM. However, oddly, Sharon was now back in the direction of the pub, meaning she had made the decision to head in the opposite direction of her home. The taxi driver was heading in a westerly direction along Wharf Road, turning left onto Harlaxton Road when he witnessed Sharon arguing with a man described as having shoulder-length hair. Sharon was reportedly attempting to get into a phone box, which would have been in this location, and the man seen with her looked as if he was trying to prevent her from entering. Detective Superintendent Stuart Clifton was tasked with leading the murder investigation, having spearheaded Grantham's only major crime in recent memory, the killings of Beverly Allett 3 years earlier. He was quoted in the days following the discovery of Sharon's body as stating, "Our inquiries indicate that her body was possibly not there on Saturday. There is a possibility that she had been abducted, killed, and then taken to the spot where it was discovered. She had taken a substantial beating. We can't say at this stage whether we are looking for one man or two. It is not yet clear, despite a post-mortem examination, whether she had been sexually assaulted." According to newspapers, a post-mortem examination would reveal that Sharon had sexual intercourse sometime before her murder. It would be revealed much later that investigators had determined this was a consensual encounter with her fiancé, Michael Duller, who was of course cleared early in the investigation due to a solid alibi. Following the murder, there was no confirmation that Sharon suffered a sexual assault. In contrast, more recent press coverage indicate that such an assault did take place. A press conference was held on Thursday the 7th of July 1994, 5 days after the discovery of Sharon's body. Sharon's fiancé Michael Duller appeared alongside her mother, Jennifer, and father, also called Michael. Mrs. Harper is quoted as saying, "We don't want this to happen to anyone else. We want justice to be done. I just can't get it out of my head who she was seen arguing with. It's terrible, just unbelievable. We are all devastated." Michael Duller added, "I just miss her. She was the best mum. And the only mum." Days later, on Saturday the 9th of July, police revealed that forensic investigators had narrowed down the time Sharon had been killed, and they were working on the theory that Sharon had been abducted, murdered, and then dumped, rather than being killed in the car park itself. Quote, "From some of the injuries she had, I would have thought it unlikely she could have sustained them outside. It is more likely they were inflicted in a vehicle." A few days later, a £5,000 reward for information leading to an arrest was announced. This was followed by police issuing a very basic description of two items that Sharon was carrying when she left the pub, but was still unaccounted for: a set of 3 keys, one described simply as a mortise lock, and the others described only by their brand name of Yale. The second item missing was Sharon's wallet, described as brown imitation leather with a popper fastener. It would be reported later that Sharon was also missing around £30 in cash. None of these items were ever recovered. As August turned to September, 3 more sightings of Sharon talking to the mystery man with long hair were reported. The first of these 3 sightings was reported by 2 men returning home from a night of drinking in the town centre. The pair confirmed they had seen Sharon with the man at 12:30 AM on the night she was murdered. The second newly reported sighting is one of 2 said to have taken place prior to Sharon's murder. Sharon was reportedly seen talking to the man on the morning of the 1st of July, several hours before her last shift at the Market Cross pub. This conversation took place outside Sharon's home on Sycamore Court. The third new sighting was reported by a friend of Sharon's and took place roughly a month before the murder. Sharon was observed by her friend talking to the man in an alleyway behind the Morrison's supermarket in Grantham town centre. The pair were described as having a, quote, intense conversation. The friend continued on their way to a nearby shop, a Woolworths chain at the time, exiting around 10 to 15 minutes later before sitting on a wall near the alleyway and noticing Sharon still talking to the man. Sharon walked away from the man and towards her friend, who reported that Sharon looked relieved to see her. The man, who was initially following Sharon towards her friend, walked past and out of sight. Sharon would apparently not reveal to her friend who the man was and asked her not to look in his direction as he walked away. The news of these newly reported sightings were accompanied by the announcement that Sharon's murder would be featured on September's edition of the BBC's TV show Crime Watch. An e-fit of the man was created for the show and shared with the media. The episode aired on Thursday the 8th of September 1994 and begins with Sharon's fiancé Michael Duller speaking about their relationship and what Sharon was like. The Market Cross pub's manager, Mark Foster, also spoke about the loss. A reconstruction of the sighting by Sharon's friend a month prior to the murder was featured, followed by further reconstructions of Sharon leaving the pub and being spotted by both the anonymous taxi driver and the driver that stopped to ask if Sharon was okay. DS Clifton was interviewed and once again appealed for the anonymous callers to come forward. Quote, "The information given by both anonymous callers was very, very similar. There are three possible motives for those calls. The first is that they are an out-and-out hoax. The second, that it's the killer trying to lay a false trail. And the one that we actually favour is that the man who rang in actually saw what it is he describes to us. Because of that, we think he probably saw the killer, so he is very central to our inquiry, and we need to speak to him." Viewers were also shown a white Leeds United home football shirt from the 1992-93 Premier League season, said to have been similar but maybe not exact to the one worn by the man seen arguing with Sharon the night she was killed. Police are said to have been disappointed with the response, which totaled 52 calls within a few days, the majority of which centred around the identity of the man shown in the e-fit. DS Clifton, quote, "One or two calls may have some interest for us, but on the face of it, there's nothing to get excited about." The following week, police received a call which they hoped would prove to be the breakthrough in the investigation they'd been looking for. The caller, identified only as being male, phoned the murder incident room, asking to speak with DS Clifton. For unreported reasons, the two failed to speak, prompting DS Clifton to appeal to this man to get back in touch via BBC Radio Lincolnshire. The man contacted the radio station with information that was then passed on to Mr. Clifton, who later told newspapers, quote, "One of the things he said was that the man responsible for Sharon's murder had assaulted her in a nightclub. The interference happened some years ago. It was stated this caller was not any of the previous anonymous callers that claimed to see Sharon on the night of her murder." Sadly, this resulted in a dead end, as it was reported a week later that the man described by the caller had been tracked down and eliminated. As October loomed, things would be made a lot more difficult for police, and even more traumatic for the Grantham community, as news of a second strangled woman began to spread. In September 1994, 39-year-old self-employed plumber Andrew Pacey and his 38-year-old wife Julie lived with their children Helen, 14, and Matthew, 11, at number 30 Longcliffe Road, a large, two-storey detached home located on Grantham's Manthorpe estate. By this time, the couple had enjoyed 18 years of happy marriage. The morning of September 26th began at the Pacey household with Andrew leaving early to attend a plumbing job. The Pacey children left to attend secondary school. Julie had made the decision to return to work late the previous year, now that her children were growing up and becoming more independent. She worked at a local nursery. Julie is said to have been in good spirits during her shift, spending a large portion of the day playing outside with the children. After finishing her shift, Julie briefly visited her parents in Barrowby, located on the outskirts of Grantham. She left at around 2 p.m. and would later be sighted by people that knew her in Grantham town centre. As usual, Julie was the first member of the Pacey family to return home that day, pulling into the driveway in her dark E-Reg Audi 80 at around 2:45 p.m, according to a sighting by her neighbours. Julie's daughter Helen was the second to make it home following her day at school. She arrived on foot at around 4:15 p.m. Walking past her mother's car, Helen entered the family home and called out to announce her arrival, but was met with no response. After a second call out went unanswered, Helen proceeded to check the downstairs rooms and back garden. With no sign of her mother, Helen went to check the rooms upstairs and noticed the bathroom door was shut. With no response from behind the door, Helen attempted to open it, but was met with resistance. She was able to force her way into the bathroom, and inside found her mother face down and unresponsive on the floor. Helen frantically tried to wake Julie up before calling 999. Paramedics arrived at the Pacey home and fought to revive Julie, but sadly their efforts were in vain and the mother of two was pronounced dead at the scene. The attending paramedics then made a startling discovery. As the sweater worn by Julie moved, it revealed a harsh ligature mark around the neck. They immediately realised Julie had in fact been strangled to death, and police were notified, with Detective Superintendent Roger Billingsley of Lincolnshire Police put in charge of the investigation. Julie showed no visible signs of being beaten, and her fingernails, described as typically being well manicured, remained undamaged. This led investigators to rule out any kind of struggle having taken place. Julie's handbag and purse remained untouched, and the home showed no signs of being ransacked. Officers found no sign of a break-in, the back door to the property was locked from the inside, and all of the windows were closed. Julie's daughter Helen was unable to recall if she unlocked the front door to the house upon her return from school, or if it was already open. Neighbours reported no disturbances at the Pacey household that day. Investigators could find nothing when examining Julie's background to generate any new lines of inquiry. She is described as being a doting wife and a loving mother with an abundance of friends and no known enemies. She and her husband were financially stable and had no debts. There was nothing to suggest any infidelity within the marriage, and the couple were not involved in any criminal activity. Andrew Pacey was ruled out immediately in the investigation due to his solid alibi. The ligature used to end Julie's life has never been recovered. Officers conducted door-to-door inquiries on the Manthorpe estate in the days after Julie's murder, and also undertook a comprehensive search of wasteland behind the Pacey family home, which has since been developed into a housing estate. A number of items were reportedly sent for forensic testing, but were never mentioned again. DS Roger Billingsley had told newspapers the day after the murder that there was no indication the crime was sexually motivated. However, on Friday the 30th of September 1994, DS Billingsley is quoted in the Grantham Journal newspaper as stating, "We are satisfied that a sexual assault took place. We think she was killed where she was found. It is the bathroom where our inquiries are centred." It was also revealed at this time that police wanted to speak with a man that had called at Julie's house the Friday prior to her murder, who would go on to become the main person of interest in the investigation. On Friday the 23rd of September, Julie was at home awaiting the arrival of a friend's daughter, whom she looked after for around 90 minutes every Tuesday to Friday until the girl's mother finished work. The front door to the Pacey house was usually left unlocked in anticipation of the girl's arrival. Friday the 23rd was no exception, and as Julie tended to some housework upstairs, there was a knock at the door. Believing it to be her friend's daughter, Julie called out for the girl to come inside. As the door opened, Julie looked down into the hallway of her home and saw a strange man in blue overalls she would later describe as looking scruffy. The man asked Julie for directions to a nearby address before promptly leaving. The girl Julie was looking after that afternoon actually walked past the man on her way up the Pacey's driveway. Julie discussed this encounter with the girl and later recounted the incident to her daughter. Although odd, the interaction hadn't seemed to worry Julie. An e-fit of the individual was created and released to the public at the start of October 1994. The man was simply described as chubby-faced, balding and fat. While the hunt for Julie Pacey's killer was in full swing, DS Stuart Clifton and his team were struggling to come up with any new leads in the search for the killer or killers of Sharon Harper. Mr. Clifton appeared once again on television to appeal for information, this time on Crime Stalker, a programme which ran for 6 years and was presented by the late John Stalker, a famed British police officer turned author and TV personality. The episode aired on Central Television on Wednesday, October the 5th. Although it can no longer be viewed, newspapers report that Mr. Clifton discussed the details of the murder before appealing directly to the man that had previously called BBC Radio Lincolnshire. Mr. Clifton wanted to speak with the caller so desperately, a tape recording of the man's voice was played. DS Clifton's appearance on Crime Stalker resulted in 11 people positively identifying the caller's voice, and he was subsequently revealed to be a 48-year-old taxi driver. Frustratingly for investigators, this proved to be another dead end, as interviews later proved that the man was a hoaxer, with police ultimately seeking to bring charges against the individual, although I could not find any information to suggest any punishment was ever handed out. DS Clifton also confirmed this caller was not believed to be either of the two callers that had claimed to have seen Sharon arguing with the long-haired man on Harloxton Road. DS Clifton's Crime Stalker appearance also publicly highlighted a major difference in opinion at Lincolnshire Police for the first time. Several newspapers are cited as early as 2 days following the murder of Julie Pacey, stating police believed there was no link between the two. In contrast, when Mr. Clifton was asked on television about Julie Pacey's murder, he said, quote, "There are some similarities and some dissimilarities with these two, but this is the second murder in a very short space of time. You have to look at the possibility it is linked. It's possible we have a man who is stalking women in Grantham." These opposing theories would be fueled publicly in the years ahead. Sharon Harper's mother Jennifer would comment a few days following the Crime Stalker appearance as stating, quote, "There are similarities in that both were strangled, but Sharon was found outside and Julie was found at her house, and both came from different backgrounds. If it were the same killer, I would have thought he would have repeated the way he got rid of the body." A devastated Andrew Pacey bravely faced the media on Friday the 7th of October 1994, 11 days after the murder of his wife Julie, and is quoted as stating, "The police are doing everything they can, but someone must have seen something. There are 2 schools on the big housing estate and only 2 roads leading on and off." DS Billingsley commented, "We had a lot of information come through, with more than 500 questionnaires completed. These are being analysed and I think there may be some useful information there." It was also at this point when police revealed another piece of information to the public. A week prior to her murder, Julie was spotted driving a dark blue 5 Series BMW on a number of occasions. This came as a shock to the rest of the Pacey family, who were adamant that Julie had no access to a vehicle other than her Audi 80. It was also revealed that a vehicle matching the BMW's description was twice seen near Julie's home on the day she was murdered, at around the time police suspected the crime to have taken place. The BMW was seen once at 3:20 p.m. leaving the estate and then again at 4 p.m. driving at a high speed along Longcliffe Road. DS Billingsley would tell newspapers just days later that he was, quote, "amazed with the response. It has been quite overwhelming." Unfortunately, the BMW would never be traced. A £5,000 reward for information was announced on Thursday the 20th of October 1994. By this time, the police had received a number of calls in relation to the e-fit released earlier that month, with witnesses coming forward to say they had seen an individual matching the description of the man who appeared at Julie's house on the Friday before her murder. Some callers had even said they too had been approached by a similarly described man on Thursday the 22nd. In addition, witnesses had reported seeing a man matching the description on the day of the murder itself. One sighting was of particular interest to investigators, as it is the only reported interaction between Julie and the unknown individual. A lady familiar with Julie who was getting into a taxi on Highcliffe Road claims to have seen Julie driving her Audi towards the adjoining Longcliffe Road where the Pacey family lived. Julie was reportedly forced to suddenly hit the brakes when a man walked out into the road from behind the taxi. Julie apparently waved an apology to the man, who was said to be walking in the opposite direction. Julie drove off and turned left onto Longcliffe Road towards her home. The man is said to have then turned around before running in the direction of Julie's vehicle. This sighting took place between 3:10 and 3:20 p.m, suggesting Julie had left the house again after being spotted pulling into her driveway by neighbours at 2:45 p.m, although it was never established where she went. If this sighting was accurate, it reduces an already slim window of time for the murder to have been committed, with Julie's daughter Helen returning home at 4:15 p.m. Further sightings of the unknown individual were also reported to have taken place the day following Julie's murder on Tuesday, September the 27th. He was spotted just before 9 a.m. on wasteland on the outskirts of Julie's estate and was observed kicking the grass as if looking for something. Later that day, at around 3:30 p.m, he was seen in a children's shop on Grantham's Vine Street. Staff reported he was asking for vinyl records and described him as being in a, quote, aggressive and agitated state. Due to very minor differences in the descriptions of the person cited, police would release a second e-fit towards the end of October, believing they could be looking for 2 separate individuals. The second e-fit was created using sightings on the day of the murder, as opposed to the first e-fit, which was created using the description from Julie's friend's daughter who witnessed the man on the Pacey's driveway. Police would later confirm they believed the sightings and e-fits to be of the same person. The individual is described as being around 35 to 45 years of age and standing at around 5 foot 8 inches tall with a heavy build. He had dark, thinning hair and a chubby face with distinctively red or pink cheeks, described as ruddy. The man was spotted exclusively wearing boots and either blue overalls or a dark-coloured boiler suit. This would lead to the man being dubbed Overalls Man by the police and media from then on. Due to the number of sightings, investigators naturally believed Overalls Man could have been Julie's killer. They theorised he could have been watching the family home and studying their movements in the days or even weeks leading up to the murder, largely because Julie was killed on a Monday afternoon, the only weekday afternoon she did not look after her friend's daughter and was home alone. Or perhaps he had gotten cold feet at the first attempt the previous Friday and was returning to finish the job. In the final week of October 1994, police delivered full-colour posters featuring the efits and descriptions to around 850 homes on the estate Julie lived in an attempt to uncover further sightings of Overalls Man. Lincolnshire police once again sought the help of BBC's Crime Watch to generate more leads, and on the 3rd of November 1994, Julie's murder was featured on the programme. Despite a number of calls, the Crime Watch appeal did little to assist investigators. On Sunday the 6th of November 1994, a memorial service was held for Julie. Her mother, Joy Wilkinson, told newspapers ahead of the service, quote, "The family is having the service because we cannot have a proper funeral yet. We do not know when Julie's body will be released." Over 500 people packed into St John's Church in Grantham to observe the 45-minute service and pay their respects. A few days later, a man from Grantham described as matching the description of Overalls Man was arrested. He was questioned but released without charge, with no further details reported. Further appeals in 1994 resulted in no new leads. However, thankfully, there would also be no further murders in Grantham. Sadly, Sharon Harper's murder continued to receive little media attention in 1995, with the investigation failing to uncover any new information. In contrast, coverage of Julie Pacey's murder began to appear in newspapers as early as the first week of January, when it was announced that police had received an anonymous call in relation to the investigation. The caller was identified in the following days, with detectives travelling to speak with him in Derbyshire. However, they later stated they were disappointed with the information he provided. Police continued to actively appeal for information in relation to Overalls Man in the coming months, and in May of 1995 a timeline was released detailing the various sightings from around the time of Julie's murder. Following a quiet few months, the one-year anniversary of Julie's murder in late September 1995 saw a number of appeals for information from police and Julie's family, followed swiftly on the 3rd of October by a second appearance on the BBC's Crime Watch programme. The primary purpose for this was so that DS Billingsley could share information previously unreleased to the public, as he revealed that a very distinctive watch was believed to have been stolen from Julie following her murder. The watch was a Luc de Rocher quartz. It was purchased in Paris around a month before the murder and was not an expensive item, costing 99 francs, roughly £12 at the time. It was estimated that only a handful of this specific watch would be in the UK, as they were not known to have been distributed outside of France. DS Billingsley admitted police knew about the watch early in the investigation, but decided to keep the information hidden as, quote, "I had hoped to find it on the offender." He and his team were heavily criticised by both the media and public for this decision. The second Crime Watch appearance generated upwards of 30 calls, but sadly no new information was reported as a result. With no further leads to pursue in either the murder of Julie Pacey or Sharon Harper, it was announced in March 1996 that police would be scaling down both investigations, with Chief Constable Peter Bensley telling the media that both inquiries remained active, but that any new information received would be dealt with by local officers. An inquest into Sharon Harper's murder took place in October 1996, with an inquest into Julie Pacey's murder taking place that December. Neither provided any further significant information. It was also in 1996 that police announced a national inquiry would be set up in an attempt to track down serial killers, with senior officers representing every major force in England and Wales taking part. Dubbed Operation Enigma, the inquiry would examine possible links between the murders of over 200 women since 1986 in an effort to identify common traits among the crimes. The initiative was reportedly established due to concerns about the number of unsolved murders of women and fears that serial killers could be operating undetected because of the lack of a central investigation unit in the UK. The inquiry was led by James Dickinson, Assistant Chief Constable of Essex, who told the Guardian newspaper ahead of Operation Enigma's first meeting in May 1996, quote, "Operation Enigma will collate and analyse relevant information regarding the victim, the crime, and any suspects for a limited number of murders where the victim is female. The research will determine whether and how the service provided to officers investigating such crimes can be improved." Agents from the FBI and Royal Canadian Mounted Police were reported to have been heavily involved in establishing Operation Enigma due to their combined experience in serial killer investigations. Detective Chief Superintendent Dave Harwood represented Lincolnshire Police at the first Operation Enigma meeting as the two Grantham murders were due to be discussed. Although details are scarce with no specific information released, multiple newspapers report that in May 1997 the inquiry directly linked the two Grantham murders after reanalysing the forensic evidence from both cases. The man who led the original investigation into Julie Pacey's murder, now Police Chief Roger Billingsley, continued to deny there were any links between the murders, and when asked about the findings he told the Grantham Journal newspaper, quote, "There are no linking factors and never have been. I have written to the families to explain the situation." There would be no further mention of Operation Enigma in relation to the Grantham murders until the following year in April 1998, when links between both cases were again reported in newspapers and again disputed by local police, with Sergeant Derek Canton telling the media, quote, "The latest meeting didn't reveal any links between the two murders. We are awaiting the full report sometime in the next 3 or 4 weeks, and when we have this, we will know whether there is anything new to go on. This is the last report I could find discussing the Grantham murders in relation to Operation Enigma." There would be one final update regarding the Grantham murders before the year 2000, as 2 men from Sussex were arrested in connection with the murder of Sharon Harper. A woman from Grantham was also questioned extensively during this time. The trio was subsequently released. Unfortunately, there would be a 15-year media silence in both murder investigations following the year 2000. This silence would finally be shattered in mid-2015 with the announcement that Julie Pacey's murder would be featured on Crime Watch for a 3rd time to reveal a significant development in the investigation. The episode aired on Tuesday the 28th of July 2015. It was revealed that police had managed to obtain a full DNA profile of Julie's killer using modern forensic techniques. However, it did not match anyone on the UK National Police database. DI Helen Evans was interviewed about the case at length during the programme and told the Grantham Journal newspaper the following day that over 50 calls had been generated as a result. The number of calls eventually surpassed 100, but sadly none of them resulted in any significant new lines of inquiry. In a strange turn of events, one of the men eliminated was a man by the name of Steve Watson, the actor who had played Overalls Man in the 1994 Crime Watch reconstruction. His DNA was taken by officers 2 weeks after the 2015 Crime Watch airing, after a number of people believed he looked similar to the killer. Apparently, Mr. Watson's likeness to Overalls Man was deemed so similar in 1994 that 2 witnesses also taking part in the filming were overcome with emotion when they saw him. In addition, when he visited the police station in costume with the TV crew, one officer even attempted to apprehend him by mistake, having previously seen the e-fit of the unidentified man. Mr. Watson would of course go on to be cleared by police. Since 2015, there have been no updates in the Julie Pacey murder investigation. However, with the killer's full DNA profile now available to investigators, hopefully it's only a matter of time before a match is found. Sadly, the investigation into Sharon Harper's murder has been at a standstill for over 20 years, with no significant updates following the year 2000. In 2015, Sharon's daughter Sarah, who was 21 and married with the surname Fowler by this point, took it upon herself to appeal for information, giving an extensive interview to the Grantham Journal newspaper about how her life had been affected by the tragedy. During this interview, it was confirmed that the only indication Sharon's family have had of any forensic developments relate to a hair found near the body, with Sarah quoted as saying, "They did find a rogue hair near my mum's body, but I think they're unsure whether it's my mum's hair or not." Sarah would go on to appeal for further information via the media in the years following, with no new information reported as a result. In 2023, Sarah took to Reddit in an effort to raise further awareness of the crime. Within the r/unsolved murders subreddit, Sarah added a post titled "The Unsolved 1994 Case of Sharon Harper, aka my mom." I reached out to Sarah via Reddit and was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to speak with her during the making of this video. Sarah was able to confirm that her past appeals had all resulted in no new information. Speaking about more recent media appearances, Sarah said, "I got asked a couple of months back from somebody who does the radio, but I declined. I feel like doing media stuff at the moment is just going to make me repeat what I've said in the past." Sarah was brought up by her mother's parents and no longer has a relationship with her biological father, Michael Duller. Although the family continues to hope for answers, Sarah does not remain optimistic, telling me, "I haven't had contact with the police in well over 5 years and they are not interested or care about doing anything to help. I don't even know who is leading the case now, so it just shows they aren't really bothered." I genuinely hope that Sarah is wrong about this. In June 2023, the original lead investigators for each of the murders, now both retired, were kind enough to spend some time with me reflecting on both their respective investigations, and whether they still maintained opposing beliefs in terms of the crimes being linked. Stuart Clifton, tasked with leading the Sharon Harper investigation from the start back in 1994, said on television just days after the second Grantham murder that there could be a connection between the two killings. He would retire in late 1996 and was called to give evidence at Sharon Harper's inquest a week later, following which he'd be quoted stating, "There is a school of thought, and one that I subscribe to, that the two Grantham murders were committed by the same man." Over 25 years later, Mr. Clifton maintains his stance, telling me via email, quote, "It was the manner of the sexual assaults which to me seemed identical on both. In my view, they are linked. This was initially supported by a HO pathologist, but he didn't want to put himself on the spot. Grantham was and is not the sort of town where you expect this type of crime. I was always of the view that the two were connected and remain so." Following my conversation with Mr. Clifton, I spoke with Roger Billingsley, in charge of the Julie Pacey investigation, to see if he was still of the opinion that the two murders were in no way linked.
Was it 26, 27 years ago?
1994, so we'd be looking at 30 years.
It's incredible, isn't it? It's the only murder investigation that I've been involved in that hasn't been resolved. In 40 odd years, it's the only one. So you can imagine my view on it. I really did want it to be resolved. It was a difficult one right from the start. It always going to be.
Take me through those first few hours after receiving sort of the call about Julie's murder. What are your immediate priorities as the person in charge of the investigation at that point?
Well, first and foremost was to secure as much forensic evidence as we could from the scene. As you know, she was murdered at home, so the house was a total scene of crime, and really the only scene as well. All through the investigation, we never found any other areas that we would consider to be the scene. My job really was to speak to the coroner and the pathologist and get the PM underway, which we did. I seem to remember we did that night. And the main thing that came out of that, of course, was the fact that she was killed by ligature, strangled. Whether that was the cause of death, I don't think we know exactly, but she was certainly strangled with a cord. So obviously we wanted to find the cord that caused the injury. That day really was taken up with setting up a full murder investigation team, because clearly it was a murder from the start and we needed a team to start from the next day, which we did.
The main person of interest in Julie's murder was sort of this gentleman referred to as Overalls Man. I'm assuming that there were no real leads beyond what was reported in terms of who Overalls Man was.
Not at all, and that was the frustration really, because we just weren't making any headway at all. We had no luck about it. It was just a day-to-day slog to try and eliminate everybody that came up in the inquiry. A lot of people, because they're decent, honest people in Grantham, wanted to help, and sometimes we felt that perhaps they were trying too hard and being, over-helpful, and maybe the information that they were giving wasn't as accurate as we'd hoped.
The blue BMW, it's one of the most interesting parts of the case to me. It was reported on multiple occasions and it featured heavily during your first Crime Watch appearance. Her family were convinced she didn't have any access to vehicles other than the Audi she was known to drive. But again, I'm guessing that no BMW 5 Series was ever traced.
No, it wasn't. That vehicle was identified, if I remember right, by a policewoman who worked at Grantham. I have to say that there was some doubt about the authenticity of that information. It never really got confirmed that there was in fact a BMW in the area at all. It was all we had to go on, so clearly it was a line of inquiry that needed investigating. But I was never totally convinced that it existed.
And I'm assuming that's also the case for the very unique watch. That information was withheld for a little bit and then sort of used to publicise the first anniversary appeal. And again, I'm assuming that was never located.
Well, I was heavily criticised for not divulging it straight away by the media. Understandably so, to be honest, because it was, something that everybody wanted to pick up on. And I was fairly sure it was useful. And of course, it would have been stupid to tell everybody that because the offender would have discarded it. So I had to make the decision, which I did and stood by, but I did receive quite a bit of criticism about it. But in actual fact, at the end of the day, the second crime watch didn't result in any additional information that I can recall anyway.
Following Julie's murder, you were quite quick to dismiss any links to Sharon Harper killing, and as I understand it, you've always maintained this view. What sort of drew you to that conclusion?
Well, you've obviously spoken to Stuart, and he and I had a difference of opinion on this. And who's right? I wish I knew. He was fairly adamant that it was related, but then if you wanted to be cynical, you would say, well, he would do, wouldn't he? Because it was a way of making sure that his investigation was continued to be funded if it was linked to mine. I'm not saying that that's why he said it. I'm saying that's what the cynic might suggest. My view on it is purely and simply that there was no forensic evidence to support the fact that they were linked, and therefore whether or not they were remains to be seen. But I took the view that because there was a lack of evidence to link it, then I have to suggest that they weren't linked. There were two ladies living in Grantham that were murdered within a short period of time. That was the thing that brought them together. Everything else, in my view, was different.
What do you think in 2023? Does this case get solved eventually?
Well, I obviously like to think so. The case is never closed, and so any information that comes will be acted upon without doubt, and DNA really is the thing that we all hope for. But as time goes on, of course, it makes it more difficult. But we've all heard of cases 40, 50 years ago that have been resolved through the advancements of forensic evidence, and I would like to think that Julie Pacey will be one of them. Her family definitely deserves to get some closure and to know what happened, as we all do. So we live in hope. I wish you well in your endeavours, because it's people like you that will help to resolve this case, I think, by keeping it in the public's mind. So anything you can do to do that is I'm grateful for.
Was the same person responsible for both of the Grantham killings? Both women were strangled while alone and sexually assaulted, yet only Sharon Harper showed signs of defensive wounds. Both murders took place in a small town with a very low rate of serious crime, yet in Julie's case, she was attacked in her own home, as opposed to Sharon, who was attacked while walking the street, with both crimes having taken place at very different times of day. Both murder investigations centred around tracking down a single person of interest. Both were described as white men in their 30s to early 40s. However, the general appearance of these two individuals differ drastically, as clearly demonstrated by the e-fits released by police. And, of course, we cannot discount the possibility that both the man with long hair and overalls man are ultimately just red herrings, allowing the real killer or killers to remain in the shadows. For every detail which seems to link the 1994 Grantham murders, there appears to be another which suggests otherwise. In the case of Julie Pacey, the 2015 DNA breakthrough continues to offer hope that her killer will eventually be caught. Regardless of the lack of such evidence in the Sharon Harper case, the killer could still be identified if the right information is made available to investigators. In both cases, one tip from the public could make all the difference in helping to provide some form of closure for those tragically left behind in the wake of these senseless killings, and deliver justice to two people who are sorely missed by many every day. If you have any information in relation to either of the 1994 Grantham murders, please contact Lincolnshire Police via their website links.police.uk or call the UK non-emergency police number on 101. The Crime Portal is a channel dedicated to exploring lesser-known murder and missing persons cases. For further information on this case or to submit a suggestion for future videos, please visit the Crime Portal website. Thank you for watching.